It's the 6th PopBio on the Dark Side seminar. So this week it's really exciting because I get to introduce Professor Shaopeng Wang, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with his work. So Shaopeng is Professor of Theoretical Ecology at Peking University in Beijing. And I was looking on his website earlier, and he's got an enormous group, loads of postdocs, loads of PhDs. Looks very exciting. The main focus of the group is in developing theory and also applying theory, so theory-informed data analysis, looking at questions relating to ecosystem functioning, diversity maintenance, and ecosystem stability. And I think that's more something in that orbit is what we're going to be hearing about today. So super exciting. And I will hand over to Shaopeng.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew, for the introduction and for Courtney for the invitation and the context. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to share with you about some of our work during the past years. In fact, I think since like 10 years ago and until now, some ongoing work. So the topic is about biodiversity and ecosystem stability across spatial and temporal scales. So to start, the issue of diversity and stability relationship is a quite old topic. It dates back to, I mean, formally people discuss about this question since 1950s. At that time, based on the intuitive observations that low diversity systems, for instance, the agriculture system and plantations, they have they experience a high risk of disease or species invasion. But compared to this low diversity system, the natural ecosystem, the more diverse systems have relatively lower probability to experience disease or speed turnovers and tempo variability. So based on these observations, in 1950s, several ecologists, some big names in the history of ecology, they proposed a hypothesis that ecosystems with greater diversity are more stable. And this hypothesis have been well accepted in the next 2 decades until 1970s, until May published a theoretical work demonstrate opposite prediction. And based on random matrix theory, may give a condition for stability for a community to maintain its stability. That is a simple equation here. The sigma is the interaction strength between species, and the S is the number of species in the community, and C is the connectance. That means how many pairs of the species have a direct interaction in the community. And this equation means that when you have, for a community, the stability of this community holds only when this equation holds. So it means that when a community have a greater number of species or greater connectance or stronger interaction strength, this community is less likely to be stable because this equation will break when there is very high species richness or connectance. And this is a mathematical result. So from 1970s, although it's not that intuitive, but this is because it's a mathematical outcome. So people start to think in different ways about diversity stability relationships, to think about this negative relationship. But then getting into the 1990s, people start to make a lot of experiment to test the relationship between diversity and the ecosystem functioning and the stability. And there have been, I think till now, thousands of such kind of biodiversity experiment. And at the beginning, it starts from, I mean, many of them start from grassland ecosystems. They planted different combinations of plant species and test how the plant species richness affect ecosystem productivity and stability. And also later on, there are a lot of similar experiments in forest systems and also in microbial in all kinds of systems. And this experiment have generally predicts that as the number of species richness increase, the productivity and the stability of the ecosystem, they also tend to increase. And here in these studies, the ecosystem stability is mainly measured by the temporal invariability of the system. The temporal invariability means the reverse of the variability, and the variability is often the CV of the system. The temporal fluctuations means if you have a larger temporal fluctuation, then it's less stable. And also at the similar time with this the development of this experiment, in the late 1990s, a number of theoretical ecologists also developed theories to try to understand this diversity stability relationship. And like Michel Ho and David Tillman, they bring this concept from finance systems, like the portfolio effect and the insurance effect, to explain why a higher diversity leads to greater stability. So the idea is very simple. When we do an investment, we spend the money to different stocks, then it will reduce the uncertainty of the return. It will reduce the maximum of the return, but it will also reduce the risk of the return. So when you have different components coming into forming a portfolio, then it has a lower variability. This is similar in the ecological community. When you have more species, different species fluctuate in different ways, then you have more stable community. So looking back from the 1950s to the positive relationship predicted in the 1950s to the negative in 1970s and to the 1990s, so again, a positive relationship, we can now understand why they have this debate, because they're using different measures. And another have a better figure to show this. The ecosystem stability is a very broad concept. It can define in many different ways. For instance, people define it as the resistance to some big perturbation to the system, or the recovery to the system, or the temporal stability, or the temporal invariability, what we have been discussed, to have the temporal fluctuations of the system. Also, there is another measure to define this. I call it here dynamical stability, but there are many different names, like the local stability from mathematical perspective, or the asymptotic resilience. They all measures the recover of the community, the whole community. Means all the species within the community need to recover to its original state after perturbation. So based on this, all these different definitions of stability, we can now understand that why diversity have a different relationship with stability when people using different measures. There are a lot of theoretical analysis showing that diversity tends to be positively related to the temporal stability and negatively related to dynamical stability in the same model. So from this result, we can understand back why we have this debate over the history of diversity stability studies. And now this is just a brief introduction about the history of this topic. And now I think because of the development of the experiment, and also all ecosystems are in a randomly fluctuating environment. So I think this temporal stability context is more and more focused. So I will be focusing on this measure in the later of my talk. And focusing on this temporal variability of ecosystem function or particularly productivity. We now understand why we know that diversity will tend to increase this tempo stability, and we understand why, like the portfolio effect, insurance effect. But now we still have faced with some challenges to apply this theory to real world. And this challenge is very common in the different fields of ecology studies. It's like when we do this research on this topic, the research skill is very local and in short term. But what we want to understand is more larger scale and longer term predictions. Let me explain this in a bit more detail in terms of diversity stability relationship. So one motivation of doing this biodiversity experiment or the diversity stability relationship is to understand the consequence of species extinction. But biodiversity is changing not only within local size, but also at much larger scales. In fact, there has been some debate on whether local species richness is really declining. So this debate in the literature, I think it starts from more than 10 years ago. I think mainly from these two papers published in Science and the PNAS. By collecting data from different systems, showing that biodiversity at this local site scale, they're not really declining, but some sites are increasing, some sites are decreasing. So on average, we don't observe a declining pattern. It's more flat at this local scale. But compared to these local scale patterns, at much larger scales, I think there is people have more consistent opinion that biodiversity is declining. For instance, this commonly discussed biotic homogenization means that different sites they have more and more common species compositions. In terms of this diversity stability relationship, that means we don't need to understand only the local scale relationship, but also much larger scales to predict the effect of biodiversity loss at large scales. And on the other hand, most of studies in ecology, they use the short-term observation. In fact, for this stability issue, by definition, it will require relatively longer observations, but still, some studies still use short-term observations. This I cited a result from my collaborator and friend Yan Hoti, but we actually also use this very short-term data to do stability analysis. And all this analysis have an implicit assumption that this short-term observation will lead to similar patterns with the long-term observations. At least it will not change the conclusion qualitatively. It may introduce more uncertainty with the short-term data, but we don't expect it will alter the conclusion qualitatively. This is an implicit assumption, but not tested actually. So based on this background, I will introduce some of our recent work focusing on this spatial extension of diversity stability relationships and also the time scale dependence of this relationship. So our focus is to extend from local and to regional scales about this diversity stability relationship. And here we develop two approaches to do this. One is discrete and one is continuous. The discrete approach is aligns with the classic concept of the alpha, beta, gamma diversity. So this concept is proposed by Robert Whittaker in 1970s. This alpha, beta, gamma diversity concept. I guess most of the audience will be familiar with this concept, but just very briefly mention it that the alpha diversity is the local plot scale, sorry, the number of species within the local plots, and the gamma diversity is the total number of species at much larger scales within a landscape or even larger. So this is a relative concept. The alpha is smaller and the gamma is larger. It's not there is not a fixed scale at which we should call it alpha or gamma, but it's really, I think it's relative, small to large. And the base diversity is measures the difference between different plots, the difference in the species composition between different plots. So here we can make a link about the concept of biotic homogenization with the base diversity. One measure of the biotic homogenization we can do is to use the base diversity. A decline in base diversity will means biotic homogenization. And similarly, we develop a similar framework for ecosystem stability. We define the alpha stability as the temporal stability within a local site, and the gamma stability as the temporal invariability of the whole meta community or the landscape, and also the beta stability as also the difference between the plots. But here it's the difference in the temporal fluctuations between the two plots. That means for instance, this blue and the red line, this blue and red line, we can measure the beta stability as the difference between these two lines. And one way is just to measure the one minus the correlation, or the reverse of the correlation between these two time series. And based on these definitions, we obviously want to understand how diversity and stability are related at all these different scales. So using a meta community model, we predict that at this alpha, beta, gamma scales, diversity is mostly positive correlated with stability. There are some scenarios that we can predict negative correlations, but it's very extreme scenarios and requiring very strong negative correlation in the environmental fluctuations. So we think it's not very realistic, at least at this landscape to regional scales. And with this prediction, the most important prediction is the beta scale, because the alpha scale relationship have been studied a lot. So the beta scale relationship means that if two communities have more different species composition, that is a higher beta diversity, then we predict these two communities will also have more different temporal fluctuations. That's what we call spatial asynchrony. And because of the contribution of both alpha and beta diversity, we predict that biodiversity loss at both local scales and larger scales, like the biotic homogenization, will impair ecosystem stability at larger scales. So these are theoretical predictions, and after that, we collaborate with empirical scientists to do some tests on this predictions. First, we collaborated with experimental ecologists working on grassland ecosystems. Here is a data gathered by Forrest Isbell from the University of Minnesota. He collected close to 40 grassland experiments, and in each of these experiments, people planted different species compositions in I think 9 meter times 9 meter plot. And so based on this data set, we the way we tested our prediction is to construct different pair of plots. For instance, our model predicts that if we have two plots with exactly the same species composition, we will predict a high synchrony between these two communities, or a low asynchrony. So the plots with same species composition, they fluctuate more similarly. And if we have two plots with more different species compositions, they will have more asynchronous dynamics. Means a more different species composition will lead to a more different tempo fluctuations. And this is what we observe from this different experiment. The x-axis is the asynchrony of plots with the same species, and the y-axis is the asynchrony of the plots with different species. So we observe that it quite consistently, the plot with the more different species composition will have higher asynchrony. So consistent what we have predicted. And so this is I mean, artificial communities planted by ecologists. Then we also do a test using observational data, the natural ecosystems. And here we use the data set from the National Ecosystem Observational Network from the US. It includes, I think, more than 40 terrestrial sites, and we use their data on plant communities. So here we can test the relationship between diversity and stability at this cohort scale and plot scale and up to the site scale. And we observe quite consistent positive relationship between diversity and stability, and also the beta scale. The beta means the difference between cohorts within a plot or different among plots within a site. So it also, when we have a higher beta diversity, we observe a higher beta stability or spatial asynchrony. And we saw that these relationships, they become even stronger at larger scales, means that when you have larger scale, you have greater spatial heterogeneity. And then in this case, it requires even greater species diversity to stabilize the ecosystem. And this, similarly, we also apply this framework to the stability of the national food production. We found that between different countries, if a country have a greater crop diversity, it also have a greater national yield stability. And this stabilizing effect of the crop diversity is also stronger among larger countries. It means you have among larger countries you have a greater spatial heterogeneity, then it will require it really require a different crops to have a greater stability. But in smaller countries, this effect is relatively weaker. So this is about the discrete approach. And in parallel, we also have been developing a continuous approach about the spatial scaling approach. So this is also, the idea is also borrowed from the biodiversity science. This is even earlier, I think more than a century ago, they published the first paper about this classic concept of species-area relationship. So when we increase the study area, we will observe more species. And people usually using a power law relationship to describe how species number increase with the study area. And these have been verified by different data from different taxa. And similarly, we also developed this stability area relationship. So when we increase the study area, we can also expect to observe increasing stability. So we developed some very simple statistical models, and it shows very consistently that stability will increase with the area, unless all the different plots, local plots, they fluctuate in perfectly synchronous manner. It means a perfect correlation between different plots. Otherwise, we will always observe a positive stability area relationship. And theoretically, we can predict two types of this relationship. One is close to a linear relationship on the log-log scales, and the other is like the tree-stage stability area relationship, just like the tree-stage species area relationship. So I didn't show the theoretical analysis, but With this theoretical analysis, we also observe this two different patterns using two datasets. For the North American birds, we do observe different species exhibit relatively linear increase of stability with increasing area on log-log scales. But by combining the plot observations and the remote sensing data, we saw that the global net primary productivity increase, the stability of the primary productivity increase with area first very fast at the beginning and then slow. But then at beyond these regional scales, continental scales, it will start to increase faster again. So this is a pattern, and based on this concept, we would like to understand what shapes the spatial scaling patterns of stability at both species and ecosystem levels. For species levels, we did a quick investigation into the trait of species, how the difference in species trait influence the spatial scaling pattern of species stability. And for the ecosystem level, we are interested in how the patterns of biodiversity influence the patterns of stability. So I will mainly focus on this later relationship. I think I should speed up. So I will go quickly with this species level relationship. I just mentioned that we observe a consistent positive relationship between bird species stability and area. And we did additional analysis showing the trait of the species can partially explain why different species have different rate of increase in stability with the area. So here we found that the faster species like the small-bodied birds and those with more offspring, these birds will have a larger intercept of the stability area relationship, means a greater stability at local site scale. But it will have a smaller slope of the stability area relationship, means as the area increase, the stability will increase with the area slowly for this fast species. And we also focus on the migration behaviors of the birds. We found that the birds with the migratory birds, they will have a faster accumulation of stability as the area increase compared to non-migratory species. And then we are more interested in how the ecosystem level stability patterns related to the species area relationship. So for instance, let's consider two landscapes with one with low diversity and the other with high diversity. Means the blue landscape have a greater increase of species as the area increase. So can we expect that this blue landscape will also have a faster increase in ecosystem stability with area? Because based on the diversity stability relationship, we may have such a prediction. And to understand this, we first develop an approach to partition the scaling of ecosystem stability into two components, to the average species stability and to species asynchrony. I mean, this partition is relatively intuitive. At each scale, the area, the stability, ecosystem stability is determined by two things. It's determined by whether the component species are stable, and also whether these different component species fluctuate in different ways. So that's how we can do this partitioning. And with this partitioning, we can then try to understand how the species area relationship may affect the ecosystem stability area relationship through its effect on the species stability and species asynchrony. So based on this, so this is simply a statistical partitioning, so there is no ecological mechanisms even. So, but it helps us to understand how the species patterns related to ecosystem stability patterns. So we do theoretical models using different types of landscapes. And what we found from these models is that both species richness and ecosystem stability increase with area. And this is relatively intuitive. Then more importantly, we found that across different landscapes, the species area relationship and the ecosystem stability area relationship, they are positively related. That means a landscape with a faster increase in species with area will also have a faster increase in stability with area. And then and the reason why this is happening is because when we have faster increase of species with area, the species oxycolony increase faster with the area, and then it leads to a greater increase in ecosystem stability with area. Then we also use two data sets, the North American plants and global river fish to test these predictions. We did find that the species area slope is positively related to stability area slope as we predicted from the theoretical model. And the last thing I would like to mention with this study that with the stability area approach, we expect that it may have some similar implications as the species area relationship. So in biological conservation, species area relationship has been used to predict the loss of species after habitat loss. And there has been a concept of extinction debt. That means the predictions based on the species area relationship will tend to underestimate the loss of species because the species area relationship only predict the immediate response of species richness after habitat loss. But there will be some species in this habitat, they are damned to extinction, but it will takes quite a long time to happen. So this has formed this extinction debt concept. And similarly, we predict there will be a similar stability debt because of this extinction debt. And so this is a conceptual figure, but we can show it also based on the simulation model we used before, that after habitat loss, the decrease in stability will also take a very long time, just as the species richness getting such a stability debt. So that means if we try to predict the stability of ecosystems after habitat loss, we need to take into account this tempo lags in this in the change in the stability. So for this first part, I gave a simple summary that we developed two approaches to study ecosystem stability across scales. And based on these two approaches, we predict that diversity and stability will be positively related, consistent across scales. That means biodiversity loss at all scales will impair ecosystem stability. Okay, so I think I will try to be brief in the second part because I mean there are less slides and also because of the time.
Yeah, don't worry, Shaopeng. We've got time, so there's still
Okay.
yeah. As long as we have kind of 10 minutes or so for questions, that'll be good.
Okay.
But yeah, no worries.
Okay. So the second part is about we just talked about the spatial skills. We found that the diversity stability relation generally hold when we increase spatial skills. But how about temporal skills? To get to this, I would like to start from the time series analysis, some techniques from time series analysis. So when we observe a time series, we usually observe it along this time domain. Like the x is the time and the y-axis is the variable of interest. But there is another way to look at this time series. It's from a frequency domain. For instance, for this example, we can observe relatively intuitively that this time series can be obtained from adding up these two time series. And one is on long time scales and one is at short time scales. The long time scale, there is a large fluctuation, and short time scales or high frequency have a small fluctuations, but more frequent. And based on this observation, in fact, we can say that we can intuitively observe that short-term observations may underestimate variability. If we have short-term observations, we just observe this short time scale dynamics. And these have been verified by a lot of ecological data back to 1980s, or relatively more recently, already 20 years ago. A lot of data showing this. When we increase the time series, we get a greater variability. Then how about species synchrony? So the variability is about the fluctuation of one species or the whole community. And then we would also like to understand how the correlation between two species may be affected by this tempo scale. So for these two species, orange and blue one, we can also partition their dynamics into long and short time scales. We can say that over long time scales, they are strongly positively correlated. But over short time scales, they are strongly negatively correlated. So if we calculate the correlation of these two time series as a single number, we will get a strong positive correlation. But from this partition, we can see that it actually have a negative component. And because of this, the short-term observation may also bias the estimate of synchrony. So if we observe this short-term dynamics, we may easily get this negative correlation. And if we have long-term observations, we get a positive correlation. So to illustrate this, we also develop a theoretical model. So this is the classic Lotka-Volterra model in discrete time. And with this simple model, we can predict that the competition actually driven contrasting patterns of species correlation at short and long time scales. So over short time scales, the competition will, first, over long time scales, competition will driven compensatory dynamics between the two species. Like we always anticipate, competition, it's a negative interactions. It will lead to one species greater and the other smaller. So this complementary dynamics. But we also observe that competition can driven positive correlations over short time scales. This is a bit surprising at the beginning, but I will give try to give an intuitive explanation later on. So that means the competition will generate compensatory dynamics only at long time scales, but will have generate more synchronous dynamics over short time scales. And because of this, we can make two predictions. One is species synchrony will decrease with time series length. As we observe the system longer, we will get more negative correlations. That means the synchrony is decreasing. And the second prediction is that the species synchrony relationship, the diversity synchrony relationship is negative in long time series. This has been consistent with our intuition or naive expectations that when we have more species, different species will fluctuate more differently than we have a lower synchrony of the whole system. But this only happens in long time series. If we got a very short time series, take an extreme of 3 years, we can even observe a positive relationship between species richness and synchrony. That means we have more species, it will lead to a greater synchrony. And why is this? Here I try to give an explanation. Whether short term will may generate a positive correlation. So consider this: we have two populations, green one and a blue one. They are at their equilibrium, and now we give a system to a perturbation. The perturbation decrease the population of the blue species, and then we will observe that the blue species will have a sudden decrease due to the perturbation, and within a short time frame, because one species have a lower population size than its capacity, we will observe that both of these two species will increase because they try to fill the unoccupied capacity. And during this stage, a very short stage, they will have synchronous dynamics. But then later on, when the capacity is greatly filled, the orange species will tend to decrease and the blue species will still tend to increase until they get their original equilibrium. So this figure explains why at very short-term scales, the two species will have synchronous dynamics, but at longer time scales, it will turn to compensatory dynamics. And this is once post-perturbation, but when we have continuous perturbation to the system, modeled by some random noise, we will observe this long-term negative correlation, but short-term positive correlation. So now we can understand this red panel from the left figure. And also we try to test this two predictions. We use some data from biodiversity experiment and also from observational data on natural ecosystem. So the first prediction is that the species synchrony decrease with time series length. And indeed, we found that in this different data set, we found the decreasing synchrony as the time series increase. But there, I mean, I should mention there is a lot of noise, but the overall trend is quite consistent declining. And the second prediction is the species synchrony decrease with diversity in long time series, but the opposite is true in short time series. So to test this, we use the biodiversity experiment data. This data set have close about 20 years observations. We artificially reduce the tempo observation to as short as 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. And we examine the relationship between diversity and synchrony as this different time frame. And we did observe that although at very long time scales, diversity and synchrony are negatively correlated, but they can be positive correlated at the shorter time scales, also consistent with our predictions. And then the last thing with this, I mean, or we can discuss about it as a question because I always get this question. So we say the short time series will have opposite prediction with the long ones. Then how long is sufficient to get the long-term predictions? The short answer is that we can't get a critical length for in general, but we can develop a power analysis approach to determine this length. And this is for any system, if we can do simulations to test how the relationship between diversity and synchrony will change as we increase the time series length, and we can define this threshold when the diversity synchrony relationship turns to be negative as the critical length, and we see this critical length will decrease, will depend on the model parameters and also determine how many replicates we have in this experiment. So the summary for the second part is we found that competition actually have opposite consequence for species synchrony at short term or long term. And this have implications for empirical analysis using time series data. So we need to be careful that the short-term data may not have similar qualitative patterns as long-term ones. So the implicit assumption that we often made is not necessarily true, at least in this case about diversity and synchrony. So in the end, I would like to thank my collaborators, particularly people from my lab who have been leading this work, and also my long-term collaborator, Michelle Ho, also my postdoc supervisor, and also collaborator from the LTR synchrony working group, which from where I learned the frequency approach that lead to the second part of my talk, and also the people who have been collecting all this data and making it public available. Thank you very much. Sorry, it take a bit longer.
Thank you very much, Shaopeng, for a great talk and very thought-provoking. So questions for Shaopeng, feel